You know that specific anxiety you get when you buy a piece of technology, like maybe a new laptop or some high-end software, and almost immediately you start getting the emails.
Oh yeah, the upsell email.
Exactly, the upsell. They're like, unlock the full potential, get the pro version, don't miss out on the real power. And you're sitting there looking at what you just bought, and suddenly it feels, I don't know, inadequate.
Right, like you only got the starter pack.
Yeah, like you're missing out on the secret features that the real users have.
It's a terrible feeling. I mean, it's basically the feeling of scarcity, the suspicion that what you have just isn't enough, and that the real treasure is behind a paywall somewhere.
That feeling, that sort of spiritual upsell, is exactly what we are deep diving into today. We're dusting off a text that is about 2,000 years old, written to a group of people in the ancient cities of Colossae and Laodicea who were dealing with specifically that anxiety. We're looking at Colossians chapter 2.
And this text is essentially a manifesto against the upsell. It's a letter written by a man named Paul, who is currently sitting in a prison cell miles away. He's never even met these people face to face. But he hears that they are being targeted by, well, spiritual salesmen.
Delvin.
In a sense, yeah. People telling him, hey, Jesus is a great start. But if you really want to be spiritual, you need our secret knowledge. You need our special diet. You need to worship our angels.
So today's deep dive is all about that pressure to add more to your life and why this ancient text claims that you might already have everything.
It is a battle between the trap of needing more and the treasure of having it all.
Let's just jump right into the text, because Paul starts off incredibly intense in verse 1. He says, I would that you knew what great conflict I have for you.
Yeah, the Greek word there is akagon. It's where we get the word agony. He isn't just mildly concerned here. He is losing sleep. He is stressing out.
Why, though? Because usually when we read these letters, the author is worried about persecution, people getting thrown in jail or beaten up. But here, the threat seems much more intellectual.
It is entirely intellectual. He's not worried about soldiers kicking down the door. He's worried about lawyers talking them out of their inheritance.
Yeah.
Look at verse 4. He says, and this I say, lest any man should beguile you with enticing words.
Beguile. That is such a specific word. It almost sounds like a magic spell.
It does sound mystical, but in this context, it's actually a legal term. It implies a lawyer using really smooth, persuasive arguments to defraud you. So it's not a lie that sounds like a lie. It's a lie that sounds smart. It sounds sophisticated.
So these beguilers aren't obviously bad guys. They're the smart guys in the room.
Exactly. And that is the trap. In verse 8, Paul drops the hammer. He warns them, beware, lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit.
Whoa, hang on. I have to push back on that a bit. Beware of philosophy. That sounds a little anti-intellectual, doesn't it? I mean, we like thinking, we like wisdom. Is he saying we should just turn our brains off?
That is a super common reaction. But we have to look at what he pairs philosophy with. He calls it vain deceit and says it follows the tradition of men. He isn't against thinking. He's against empty thinking that masquerades as deep wisdom. And then he uses this devastating insult. He says these philosophies are just the rudiments of the world.
Rudiments. See, that's one of those Bible words that just glides right over my head. What are we actually talking about when we say rudiments?
This is where Paul gets savage. The Greek word is stoichein. It refers to the ABCs, literally the alphabet blocks you give a toddler to learn their letters.
Wait, really? He's calling their philosophy toddler blocks?
Yes. So imagine this scene. You have these philosophers in Colossae. They're claiming to teach advanced PhD-level spiritual calculus. They have secret calendars, cosmic theories about angels, complex rituals. They think they are the absolute elite. And Paul looks at their advanced system and says, that isn't advanced. That's playing with blocks.
Ouch. So he's calling it elementary.
He's saying that trying to reach God through rules, rituals, and human logic is the most basic human thing you can do. It's not high level at all. It's the ceiling of the natural world. It's rudimentary.
So if that's the ABCs, what is the advanced class?
Well, according to Paul, the advanced class, and the entire library for that matter, is a person. In verse 3, he makes this massive claim. He says, in Christ are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge.
All of them.
All. Not some, not the starter pack. All. And this is his logic. If you are standing inside the vault where all the gold is stored, why are you buying a treasure map from a guy on the street corner?
Because the guy on the corner has enticing words. He makes the map sound really exciting.
Precisely. But it's a scam.
Okay, so that sets the stage. We have the upsell of these fancy philosophies versus the vault of Christ. But let's get into the theology, because Paul doubles down on this vault imagery in verse 9.
This is the anchor of the whole chapter right here. For in him dwells all the fullness of the Godhead bodily.
Godhead, there's another heavy term.
It basically means deityhood, the essence of what makes God, God. Paul is arguing that Jesus wasn't just a messenger, he wasn't just a guru. He claims that the fullness of the divine nature, the entire operating system of God, dwells in Christ in a physical body.
And then immediately, right in verse 10, he pivots to the listener. He says, and you are complete in him.
Complete. That is the antidote to the upsell.
But I have to be honest here, and I think a lot of listeners might feel this too. I don't feel complete. I wake up most days feeling very incomplete. I feel like I need to read more books to be smart enough. I need to meditate more to be calm enough. I need to work harder to be successful enough. Complete feels like a stretch.
And that feeling of inadequacy is exactly the crack in the door that the beguilers pry open. They say, you feel empty, here's a rule to follow, here's a secret to learn. But the word Paul uses for complete means filled to the brim. Think of a ship that is fully rigged, stocked, and ready to sail. Or a glass that just can't hold another drop without spilling.
So Paul is saying the tank is full, even if I feel like I'm running on fumes.
He's saying that in terms of your standing, your access to God and your spiritual resources, you have the head of all principality and power.
Yeah.
You don't need a plug-in. You don't need an expansion pack.
But there is a problem, right? Even if I'm theoretically complete, I still have baggage. I have a past. I have what the text calls sin. How does being complete deal with the fact that I'm actually kind of a mess?
That is where the text gets gritty. Paul stops talking about treasure and starts talking about surgery. He brings up circumcision made without hands.
Which sounds incredibly painful, metaphorically speaking.
It's a graphic image, for sure. In the ancient world, circumcision was the mark of the covenant. It was a literal cutting away of flesh. Paul takes that and says, I'm talking about a spiritual surgery. He calls it the putting off of the body of the sins of the flesh.
So it's like a heart transplant? Or maybe cutting away a tumor?
Exactly. He's saying that when you connected with Christ, something fundamental changed in your nature. It wasn't just a behavior modification program. It was a cutting away of the old life. And he links this directly to baptism in verse 12. He says, you were buried with him and risen with him.
Buried. I feel like we gloss over that word a lot.
We absolutely do. But you don't bury people who are just trying to improve themselves. You bury people who are dead. Paul is saying your old way of operating, that ABC way, the way of trying to earn your worth, that person died. They are buried. You are now running on a new power source, which he calls the operation of God.
Okay, so we've got the surgery, we've got the burial, but then starting in verse 14, Paul gives us perhaps the most dramatic cinematic visual in the whole text. This is the aha moment for me. We have to talk about the handwriting of ordinances.
This is the plot twist. This is where the legal battle is decided.
So break it down for us. What is a handwriting of ordinances? Because honestly, it sounds like a parking ticket.
It is way worse than a parking ticket. The Greek word is cheirographon. It literally means a handwritten document. But in that culture specifically, it referred to a bond of debt.
Like an IOU.
Yes. Imagine a ledger, a long scroll, and every time you messed up, every time you broke a moral law, every time you acted out of selfishness, it got written down. And then, at the bottom, you signed your name. I admit this is true. I owe this.
That is terrifying.
This is a massive legal indictment. Paul says this document was against us.
Yeah.
It was contrary to us. It stood between us and God like a massive wall of debt.
And the beguilers, the people trying to sell these rules, they're basically saying, hey, if you follow our rules, you can pay off the debt a little bit at a time.
Exactly. Fast on Tuesdays, pay off a dime. Worship this angel, pay off $1. But the debt is infinite. You can't pay it.
So what does Paul say happened to the ledger?
He says Christ took it out of the way. But notice how he did it. He didn't just file it in the trash. He didn't just lose the paperwork.
Verse 14 says, nailing it to his cross.
That image is so visceral. Historically, when a debt was canceled, they might cross it out or tear it up. Paul imagines Jesus taking this legal document, this undeniable evidence of all my failures, and driving a spike through it on the cross. The nails that went through Jesus went through the debt.
So the debt died with him.
It's canceled. The account is settled. The blackmailer has no leverage anymore.
But he doesn't stop there. Verse 15 turns this from a courtroom into a battlefield. And having spoiled principalities and powers, he made a show of them openly, triumphing over them in it.
We're back to war imagery. Remember the word spoil from earlier, like being kidnapped or robbed? Now the tables are turned. Jesus strips the armor off the principalities and powers, those dark spiritual forces that held that debt over our heads.
And made a show of them openly.
This refers to the Roman triumph. When a general won a major war, he would come back to Rome and throw a massive parade. He would ride a chariot, and behind him, he would drag the defeated enemy kings, stripped of their armor, in chains so the whole city could mock them.
That is intense imagery to apply to the crucifixion.
Paul is saying the cross looked like a defeat for Jesus. He was naked, he was bleeding, he was dying. But spiritually, it was a victory parade. He was dragging the dark powers behind him, showing the universe, they have no power over my people anymore. The debt is nailed.
Okay, take a breath, because that is a massive theological mic drop. The debt is nailed to the cross. The enemy is humiliated in a public parade.
Right.
So if that's true, why on earth were the Colossians still stressed out about what they ate for lunch?
That is the million-dollar question. And it's why verse 16 starts with, therefore, because the debt is gone, let no man therefore judge you.
And he lists the things they were stressing about. Meat, drink, holy days, new moons, Sabbaths.
These were the shadows.
Explain that analogy. Verse 17 says, which are a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Christ.
It's sort of like Plato's cave, but better. Imagine you are standing on a corner, waiting for your best friend. The sun is low. Before you see your friend, you see a long shadow stretch out on the sidewalk around the corner.
Okay, I can picture that.
The shadow tells you he's coming. It outlines his shape. It proves he exists. But when your friend actually walks around the corner, do you drop down and hug the shadow?
No, that would be weird. I hug the friend.
Exactly. Paul says the rituals, the kosher laws, the Sabbath days, they were the shadow cast by Jesus throughout history. They were good. They showed the shape of holiness. But now that the body, the substance, the reality is here, why are you going back to play with the shadow on the pavement?
That makes so much sense. The shadow isn't bad. It's just empty compared to the person. Why obsess over the menu when the meal is already served?
Precisely.
Boom.
But here's the twist. Some people prefer the shadow
Why?
because the shadow is safer. You can control a ritual. You can control a diet, a relationship with a living person. That requires trust. That's scary.
And that leads us right to verse 18, where Paul warns about the mystical trap. He talks about voluntary humility and worshiping of angels.
This is for the person who says, okay, the theology is boring. I want an experience. I want a vision. Paul says they are intruding into those things which they have not seen.
And ironically, he says they are vainly puffed up by his fleshly mind. Which is funny because usually people who talk about their visions act super humble. Oh, I'm just a vessel. But Paul says it's actually pure ego.
It's counterfeit spirituality. They think they're special because they have secrets. But the fatal flaw, according to verse 19, is that they are not holding the head.
The head being Christ.
Right. If you disconnect from Christ to chase an angel or a ritual, you cut off the flow of life. It's like decapitating your faith. The body only grows if it's connected to the head by joints and bands, getting nourishment directly from God.
This brings us to the final section of the text, verses 20 through 23. And honestly, this feels the most modern to me. This is the critique of asceticism, extreme self-discipline.
It's the hustle culture of religion.
Yes. Paul asks, if you are dead with Christ from the rudiments of the world, why are you subject to ordinances? And then he quotes their slogans. I love this. Touch not, taste not, handle not.
It's the religion of no. Don't eat that. Don't touch that. Stay away from fun. If you are miserable, you must be holy.
And let's be honest, that looks impressive. If I see a guy who wakes up at 3 a.m., takes an ice bath, eats only raw kale, and prays for 4 hours, I just assume he's a better person than me.
We all do. We associate suffering with virtue. If it hurts, it must be working. Paul actually admits this in verse 23. He says these things have a show of wisdom, they look wise, they involve worship and neglecting of the body.
But then comes the punchline. And depending on your translation, this can be hard to catch, but the meaning is devastating. He says all this strictness is of no honor to the satisfying of the flesh.
Translate that for us.
He's saying it doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
You can starve your body, you can beat yourself up, you can follow every rule on the list, and it will not stop your heart from being selfish, lustful, or proud. It has no value against the actual indulgence of the flesh.
That is actually kind of depressing, but also freeing.
It's incredibly freeing. Paul is saying that external rules cannot fix an internal problem. You can manage the behavior, sure, but you can't cure the disease with a checklist.
Only the circumcision without hands can do that. Only the death and resurrection.
So let's zoom out a bit. We've been on quite a journey here. We started in a dusty library with a warning about smooth-talking philosophers selling us the ABCs. We saw a vision of a legal debt being nailed to a cross. We watched a Roman victory parade. And we ended with the realization that our willpower is basically useless against sin.
It is a sweeping, brilliant argument.
If we have to distill this down, if you taking this deep dive with us take just one thing away from Colossians 2, what is it?
It's the concept of completeness. You're constantly being bombarded with messages telling you that you are lacking. You need this product, this philosophy, this political view, this diet to be okay. Paul looks at the believer and says, if you have Christ, you are full. Stop looking for treasure in the empty desert. You're already standing in the vault.
And that leads to the practical application in verse 6. As you have therefore received Christ Jesus the Lord, so walk ye in him.
Right? You didn't get saved by being smart or disciplined. You got saved by receiving, by trusting. Stay there. Don't try to graduate from grace to works. Just keep walking in the trust you started with.
I want to leave you with a thought to mull over this week. We talked about touch not, taste not. We talked about how much we love rules because they make us feel in control.
Control is absolutely the drug.
Exactly. So here's the provocative question. Where in your life are you trusting in a checklist because you're actually afraid of the relationship? Is it easier to follow a strict set of rules, do this, don't do that, than it is to actually trust that you are completely full and forgiven?
That's a dangerous question to ask yourself.
It is, but that's exactly why we do the deep dive.
Indeed.
Thanks for joining us. We'll see you in the next one.